Okay, we have our final presenters beaming in from the UK. I'm sure, David, you can tell me where you are right now because I've heard you travelling all over the world as well. This is a case study particularly on how technology and human factors thinking have been applied to identify and monitor fatigue risk within a light rail context. So absolutely applicable to heavy rail, passenger rail, freight for us, but also we have a lot of trams in our country also. Colin Kerr will be leading this one from the operator's perspective. He's an independent consultant and director of the Light Rail Safety and Standards Board and chair of the Light Rail Standards Committee in the UK. With more than 4 decades of cross-discipline engineering experience, his career has focused on the delivery of safe, integrated and sustainable public transport systems in Edinburgh and across the UK. More recently, he has supported innovation in the transport sector through collaboration with universities and industry partners, including, as you'll see here, on the introduction of fatigue monitoring technology. In the background, Andrew Grant is representing the consultancy, providing the technical solution here. Andrew has a business development role with IHF Digital, working with organisations looking to explore and implement their BaselineNC technology for real-time monitoring of fatigue. And to provide a bit of local context, we have IHF Digital's Asia Pacific Director, David Clark, who will jump on and give us a brief introduction to the innovation aspect before Colin kicks us off with his case study. Welcome all of you to our forum, and I'm going to hand over to you right now.
Great, thanks Fiona. Just checking, I can't see on my screen, is Andrew and Colin, are they online?
They are online and ready to go, so
Great.
Just with you.
Great, fantastic. Well, thanks everybody for joining today's forum and giving us the opportunity to discuss our fatigue technology. Just to give you a broad overview, IHF stands for Integrated Human Factors. We're a consultancy that is based, headquartered in Edinburgh in the UK, and we have an office in Dubai, Perth and Sydney. We were formed in 2012, focusing primarily on human factors. And over the last sort of 3, 4, 5 years, we've been developing our digital offering. A key tenet of that is BaselineNC, of which Colin will be able to give you a much more sort of expert insight into it. And Andrew Grant and Sadif as well will be able to answer any queries as they head up IHF Digital. So rather than me sort of prattle on with a life story, I'll hand over to Andrew and Colin, and they can kick off and start demonstrating and discussing BaselineNC.
Thanks very much, David. As you've just been told, I'm Colin Kerr, and it's always great to get the graveyard shift because I know you're all keen to just get to the pub, but we'll try and keep it short. So without further ado, let's get the presentation up. Can you all see that?
Yep, all good, Colin.
Excellent. So we just had Dave has just introduced you to what it is. So what was the inspiration for this BaselineNC stuff? It was the overturning tram at Sandilands Junction in Croydon in November 2016. The Rail Accident Investigation Branch reported in their report that the tram running from New Addington to Wimbledon derailed and overturned on a curve as it approached the junction. 7 people lost their lives in that incident. 51 were taken to hospital, with 16 of them with serious injuries. The tram entered a low-speed curve, which was a speed limit of 20 kilometres an hour, at a speed of 73 kilometres an hour. And as such, it overturned. And so the people who were killed were actually thrown out of the windows that had broken because of the infrastructure that was there broke the windows. They fell out and were killed. So emergency braking suggested that the driver had lost awareness, that he was approaching the tight left-hand curve. Although some doubt remains as to the reasons for the driver not applying sufficient braking, the RAIB concluded that most likely cause was temporary loss of awareness of the driving task during the period of low workload, which possibly cause them to microsleep. So they made a recommendation. Recommendation 4 for the overturning tram at Sandilands: UK tram operators, owners, infrastructure managers should work together to research and evaluate systems capable of reliably detecting driver attention state. So that was the inspiration for the whole thing, because I set up a meeting with the City of Edinburgh Trams, because we had regular meetings talking to their innovation manager. So they were discussing the possibilities of other types of innovation in the Edinburgh area for the City of Edinburgh. And we happened to be discussing work that was being carried out by NASA engineers who had sought permission to reverse engineer a smartwatch and to understand how it could be used and, well, how it worked, basically. And in the meeting, we discussed that it might be a good idea if we could get something similar to do fatigue detection. So we decided to follow up an innovation project to have suppliers design a body-worn device that could provide suitable warning. That project was the Driver Innovation Safety Challenge, DISC short, which commenced in March 2019, and its scope was to develop a solution monitoring various biometrics to preemptively identify the main typologies of illnesses resulting in loss of focus, consciousness, paralysis, risks of heart attack, strokes, epilepsy, and identify fatigue levels of a driver, which could similarly create conditions for loss of capacity. And also, it was to be a solution to monitor and evaluate that information and make the tram control team and the control centre aware in real time of the risks, to enable appropriate interventions to be taken through appropriate alarms, red, amber, green, for example. We carried out market research at the time and found out that there were no existing devices to provide fatigue and well-being solution. There were some that did fatigue. There were none really that were doing well-being, and there was certainly none that were doing both. Edinburgh Trams and UK Tram carried out a tour of UK light rail systems. No, go back one, sorry. So, Edinburgh Trams, UK Tram carried out a tour of UK light rail systems to praise all the networks that it was our intention to develop a solution to support RAIB recommendation 4. All systems noted their intent to be kept abreast of the developments with the solution. Identifying the scope of the procurement strategy was a challenge in itself, because it was quite innovative, because we had to document the requirements for something we knew was not available and have the suppliers come to the table with a solution to invent one. So normally when you go to a procurement exercise, you've got all your requirements, you know what you want, and you know that the suppliers can supply it off their shelves, largely speaking, and with some minimal alterations that they can deliver you something. In this case, all we had was what we wanted it to do, but we knew there was nothing there. So following that exercise, IHF Limited were chosen following the DISC procurement exercise to deliver the wearable solution. At the time of the early design, COVID-19 was rampant, obviously throughout the world, and the early device used the known symptoms of COVID-19 so that the wrist-worn device could generate suitable biodata that could be safely gathered and fed into the machine learning process to generate an appropriate algorithm. And it had the added thing that Edinburgh Trams could get early warning that some of their staff might be getting COVID-19 or be in danger of it. So during the DISC pilot, we had a number of medical experts in the field: cardiology, a heart expert, cardiovascular health, a professor from Napier University, and a medical systems big data computer modelling person from Stirling University, who was going to tell us whether or not what we were doing was possible from a technical perspective. There were 20 volunteers from Edinburgh Trams wearing the device during their work shift, and the pilot confirmed the wearable gathered suitable data. So the evolution. So the next phase was to develop the disc initial wrist-worn device, and it was named Focus Plus in 2020. So the second phase saw the name change to signify emerging from the disc project to the pre-commercial device ready for independent testing. At this point, the Light Rail Safety and Standards Board, acting on behalf of the light rail industry, became engaged to support independent testing of the solution to detect and warn of fatigue. Focus Plus wrist-worn device was tested by Edinburgh Trams and Ian Rowe Associates Limited, a UK-based simulator manufacturer called Avanson. Edinburgh Trams carried out testing on volunteers who had come off a full driving shift and then continued to drive on the simulator system using the comprehensive tools. Our testing verified that for drivers with significant fatigue in approaching the so-called micro sleep stage, Focus Plus could raise an early alarm to enable the driver and controllers to act in a timeless manner to avert a dangerous event. The early so-called red alert could be provided significantly ahead of any unsafe activity, in some cases over an hour, thus enabling appropriate reactions to be rolled out. Avanson carried out similar tests at their offices in Milton Keynes and established that from a technical perspective, the system could reliably detect fatigue with a 98% reliability. Now, the only thing that was close to that we found in our market research was the ram jack, which is the thing. It's a system used in the Australian shale mining, and it was only 95% effective. So, the independent testing. So, IHF Limited resolved all the outstanding bugs on the pilot device, and the current product, BaselineNC, underwent 2 further trials to establish its back office process and to confirm IHF Limited ability to commercialise. The back office processes being what the previous speaker was talking about in terms of making sure you get your processes correct and acceptable usage policies. The final trials were rolled out in Edinburgh. Edinburgh Tram carried out activities to develop acceptable use policies and to assure the workforce that the devices would not be used to monitor their behaviours, only used to protect them and the public from dangerous events and unsafe decisions. It was not ever meant to be a tool to be a big stick type tool, so we were never going to be using it to penalise people. So Edinburgh established quite early that if there was an alert that was raised that a driver was heading into unsafe territory, they could be taken off shift and not lose any of their wages. They would send them home if that was what was required, and they would not be penalised. What we did find was that when we got red alerts with the device, it was mostly down to drivers that were what we call spare shifts. So these were extra drivers that come in to fill up the capacity as and when needed through the day. So the spare shifts were inactive drivers for most of their shifts, so they would sit in the canteen originally. And then maybe late in the afternoon they would go out to pick up the peak shifts or do extra activities for drivers that had called off. So after a period of inactivity, they would drive a tram and experience fatigue. This is what we found, which was our worst case. So that was enabled us to make the decision to stop them being inactive and to give them other activities through the day, training exercises, put them on the simulators. And that, largely speaking, dealt with that fatigue issue. The other place where this was rolled out was in Debrecen in Hungary, DKV. And I don't know if you want to talk more about that, Andrew. Maybe later. Following successful completion of those trials, Edinburgh Tram became the first customer for the commercial solution. Other systems becoming engaged include Manchester Metrolink, Blackpool Transport Services, and Transport for London. So you can see there the evolution of the commercial product became BaselineNC. So I've really talked about this slide as well. So really getting through quite fast here. So other incidents that could have been avoided. The ones mentioned there are heavy rail environment, buffer stop collision at London Bridge Station. There's a Finland investigation into collision. The bottom one there, the San Francisco one, is the Muni Light Rail system in November 2025, where the driver of the Muni Light Rail had a fatigue incident and fell asleep at the controls. There's quite a good video in this one actually on YouTube. And the light rail vehicle was recorded at a speed of 50 miles an hour before it went over a set of points after it passed through a tram stop. And luckily the driver woke up by the severe jolting going through the points, which also happened to knock many passengers off their feet and averted a more severe accident. So there are other incidents recently, one in Oslo in Norway, where recently there was a tram derailment in Oslo where the tram derailed over a set of points and ended up in the front of an adjacent Apple store. Although there was no injuries with this, it happened because the tram driver experienced a severe stomach cramps and passed out due to norovirus. And he collapsed over the traction brake controller and accelerated through a set of points and derailed. There's also, I've done my homework, there's been a number of reported incidents in Australia relating to fatigue and well-being. Collision tram to tram in Melbourne, derailment of tram at Mooney Ponds, Victoria. The waterfall incident, which was a derailment due to a driver having a heart attack. The freight train collision near Perth and Port Hedland ore train collision in 2024. All these reports indicate that the driver probably experienced a fatigue, well-being episode, e.g. heart attack, hypoglycemic drowsiness, poor fatigue management, or microsleep. So these incapacity incidents would probably, most definitely be, certainly the majority of them would have been identified by BaselineNC, thereby provide an opportunity to avert incidents through appropriate action following alerts. The Oslo one, for instance, the norovirus thing, the BaselineNC would have been singing alerts for most of that morning, long before the driver ever got anywhere near doing something unsafe. So the other side of this, so the BaselineNC is a matter of great interest to the Office of Rail and Road here in the UK, who are the oversight body in the UK with the authority to impose sanctions on tramways that are not managing their safe operations under the safety management systems. So throughout the whole life cycle from development to final product, I've kept the ORR briefed on the forward trajectory and aims. They fed back to us that they are very impressed with the work that's been done and that the level of technical reliability providing confidence in the system having a high rate of positive identification. They were also impressed that acceptable use policy has been appropriately risk assessed for Edinburgh Trams. And the last briefing session with the ORR, they've asked me to come and speak to one of their safety seminars, which includes all the good and the great in the safety reporting world, rail accident investigation branch, air accident investigation branch, marine accident, all the AIIs. And Rail Safety and Standards Board, Health and Safety Executive, and other international safety authorities. So looking forward to that one. Over Q&A, isn't it? So that takes us to Q&A. I know I've run through that very quickly, but
That's all right, Colin. I reckon you're going to get a few questions on this one. And yes, we'll bring on Andrew now. And between the two of you, I'm sure you can work your way through them. We've had a couple of questions, and one of the ones that I had anyway, Joanne has jumped in also around user consultation. It can often be a challenge, particularly with body-worn data collection, biometrics, all of those kinds of systems. And I saw with your trial, you relied on volunteers for that.
Yeah.
How did you approach that engagement of frontline staff to adopt tech like this, given it's their personal data? There's, potentially a culture of concern about it being misused. What was the sort of way you approached those conversations?
We recognised very early on that we had to engage with the unions as a first starter for 10 to try and get them on board. Try to persuade them at the early stage that it was in their best interests to come on board during the design phase so they could actually set the requirements that would be for acceptable use policy. As you would expect, the unions were quite resistant to the whole thing. I took the conversations not with just local union, but all the way up to the national exec and all of that stuff. And as you'd expect, they were quite resistant because anything new, the official unions dig their heels in right away. But we also put plenty of communications out to the staff through notice boards and through meetings to tell them what it was all about. And we got very positive feedback from most of the staff, thinking that they were quite supportive of anything that was going to make the driving experience safer, and they understood, most of the staff understood that we were actually protecting them by making sure that they weren't doing unsafe things and that the public weren't being put in danger. So in order to get the volunteers, though, as with most human nature things, we ended up having to give them some money to get involved. But once they got that money and they got involved, they were right full front behind it.
Yep. Wow. Yep, that's good. In terms of broader issue around system trust, so and how the information was used, you were talking a little bit around the red alerts were leading to the driver coming off shift but not being penalised.
Yeah.
That could be a bit of a culture shift for some organisations. There's a big transition around how we, investigate, look at sort of system levels rather than pointing at the individual. Was there any issues there with the organisation you're working with around maybe changing the way they react to positive
not
data?
Not at all, because Edinburgh trams, believe it or not, are very, very human focused. Their interest is primarily in safety, and there's no resistance whatsoever. In fact, our managing director was in the lead for pushing forward the ideas about, well, what are their concerns? And I had their concerns because I got a list of their concerns from the union, and we shut down all of the concerns one by one. And one of them was, you're going to penalise me because Edinburgh Trams does have if you call off sick, then you don't get paid for the first 3 days and then you go on sick pay. So that was those 3 days that they potentially would have not been paid were agreed to be commuted and that they were paid. Because at the end of the day, the red alerts don't continue for days and days and days. If you were getting sent home at all, which didn't happen, but in fact hardly ever happened during the trial, you were back in the next game day and you were back ready for work. So it was the cost of paying an extra day or an extra half a day was neither here nor there.
Yep, that's good to hear. One around the the biometric detection of human physiological conditions like fatigue. There's a comment around the fact that some of those tools can lead to false positives or annoying the users or potentially leading to circumvention. And so there's often a need to do some additional validation around that, not only of their sensitivity, detecting true events, but also their specificity, thanks Max, not detecting non-events. How was that explored in terms of the development of the tool?
That was largely speaking the testing that Ian Rowe Associates was doing. They were the independent tester on behalf of Light Rail Safety and Standards Board. And that was where their 98% figure came. So that is as high as you get in terms of reliability for not getting false positives. And the results were very impressive.
There we go. Have you done any trials with heavy rail, or is there any exploring opportunities with any heavy rail organisations at the moment?
I'll let Andrew speak to that one.
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. Yes, we've done a number of trials with a heavy rail operator in the UK, but interestingly, that was with the on-site engineers rather than the drivers. And we actually again have a short video with a union rep just talking about the difference it made in being better into understanding shift patterns, rotas, and so they wanted to take it from a safety perspective from engineers before moving on to the drivers, which again was something that was the way they wanted to push it. So that was very successful, and we're now looking to push that further out because they had it with as Colin gave you the evolution of the product, they had it with an older iteration which had a different sort of technology behind it, but now we've got the app, as you saw, if you saw that in the Q&A slide. So they're now going to be going back out. But what they found very useful, it was just, Colin said, it's just identifying where fatigue's occurring. They wouldn't know this, and then they can make the adjustments, and everything obviously centered around safety. Particularly these are guys working on the lines at 2 a.m, fixing things when it's trains passing, and it's very dangerous. So fatigue was a huge risk for them.
Yeah.
Sorry. One other aspect that's worth bringing up is in terms of a couple of these other tramways in the UK that I've suggested are becoming engaged. They are coming at it from their union reps are giving them a hard time about fatigue. So the unions are already complaining about fatigue. And so the BaselineNC is the perfect tool to bring into the business to validate that fatigue or otherwise.
Yep. And obviously helpful that there's someone already trialing it, that they can, having somebody go first can be helpful in those situations. In terms of how the personal data is managed in the system, obviously you showed those screenshots of the app, which is for a person's personal data that they would get for themselves. How does that data get managed? Who's it visible to? And how do you avoid it being a data collection system and more of a warning system, I guess?
Yeah, I suppose there's two aspects to this. The personal data is owned by the user, and nobody gets to see that except the user, unless they choose to share it, either with their staff or OK Health or their GP, whatever, but it's their personal data. So everything is encrypted, from REST and to send. We send up to the cloud where the algorithm is. So if I get an alert on my wearable, as you saw in the picture, and Colin's my supervisor, he'll potentially get the alert at the same time, but all that Colin will see, or anybody in a control room, is that Andrew's got an amber or a red alert against them. There's none of the underlying biometric data gets shared at all. And say that stays entirely with me. So to show you the screen was to see that as an individual, I anytime can go back and look at that data and see if there's anything, particularly health concerns, anything that's sort of showing up, trends that are behind the alerts. But what the system does, it feeds up to a control room, however you have your operations, so you can pick up the alerts. But the data is fully owned by the user. But what it does allow us to do, without going into too much of a product pitch, if you take each individual Andrew who's driving or moving machinery or whatever I'm doing, that allows organisations to take that data and actually start looking at it and saying, okay, where is the pinch points? Where's fatigue occurring between rosters, between departments, between different tasks, different lines? You can drill up and down and look at that data so you can start making much better informed decisions as to how you can really manage and where the risk of fatigue is occurring. And as Colin said, interestingly, right now in the UK, particularly within London and Manchester, the two biggest networks, they're looking at, particularly that because the unions are kicking up a fuss about fatigue, and they're saying, okay, if you're saying the rosters are creating the fatigue, we don't want this, we don't want to create that. So let's look at it and fully understand where the fatigue's occurring so that we can make proactive decisions. And it sort of leads into this whole sort of, as Colin said right from the beginning, following Croydon, it's that preventative maintenance. We want to get to something before it escalates. So you've got things like the in-cab cameras, and that they've been superb for looking at behaviours, particularly in cabs for logistics drivers. But the whole point of coming up with the product from Croydon was that we need something that gives you advanced time to make safe decisions. And the back end to that is you get a whole load of objective data. So as well as relying on the human, you're actually getting cold, hard objective data as well. Fatigue's happening here. So you need to, put your attention to it. One of the other things that wasn't touched on as part of when we're building the individual baselines, each user gets a baseline so we know what their standard physiological or normal physiological status is, and that's how we then trend anything that's trending away from that. We also asked them to use the Karolinska sleepiness scale, which most of the people in the call are probably aware of, the KSS. So that's the subjective measure. So it's really to help us and the drivers or the users understand what fatigue looks like for them, because it's hard. We all wander around not sure if we are fatigued, and I shared with you a couple of videos, and you can certainly make these available from the reconstruction we did for the independent testing. But we got a fatigued driver in the system straight away, knew they were fatigued, but we had 2 microsleeps observed before the driver sort of put the hand up on the simulator to say, look, I really shouldn't be driving this. But the software, baseline had picked this up hours before. So in a live operational scenario, you'd be able to see that person trending away and make timely interventions, and whatever those are, via your policies and procedures. Yeah, Colin.
Yeah, it's important to note. Andrew makes a good case for the corporate level of safety there, but the whole focus of this thing was always about the safety for the user, and to make sure that they weren't making decisions that were going to make harm them or others. And the main thing that has come out of it is that it's very good at doing that. So as I said before, the Manchester or Blackpool or London, they're going to use it in order to validate their rosters or their shift patterns. But there's also the user, because what it'll do is it'll potentially give good information to the user. You have to do training for fatigue to the users as well, because you can't have them coming in at the lunch break and having a big meal and then going back out driving, because they're just going to get fatigued, and that's a known thing. So it's also very important to help the users manage their own fatigue status and understand what it is for fatigue. It's not the same as I'm tired. Fatigue is a whole different parcel of worms, shall we say.
It is. We could do a whole next forum on fatigue, I tell you. Just one more question before we end our session. Just on the commentary you had before, Andrew, around how you could use the data at a system level. Just a question around whether you can aggregate shift data to find trends. Is that how this would work, or not?
Yes. We're developing a sort of intelligent AI-driven tool, which is coming out at the end of May, I think, which is to sort of really help you really go into the data and ask the questions and say, start looking, doing the sort of the proper compare and contrast. Because as human factors, people like yourselves, we've all used the subjective methods, which are great, but having the objective data is just so powerful now, because it's uncontrovertible. It just said, well, this is what's happening. You need to find out why. And as Colin said, beyond the sort of the safety concerns. But just one other thing you mentioned, Colin touched on the trial we ran in Hungary with Deborah Sem, which was with a 6-month trial. That was a non-unionised environment, so it was quite interesting. So the users there really embraced it very quickly. And one of the key learnings, and Colin touched on there, they started to understand what fatigue felt to them. So what they would measure themselves using the Karolinska sleepiness scale. Then baseline would say, well, actually, you're more of a 6 than a 3. Oh, okay, so you're sort of amber. But they, in time, very quickly learned. So they were able to start making their own interventions when they knew what that felt like to be fatigued. And that might just be taking a caffeine drink, having a quick break, but just being mindful of it. So it's interesting. All these sort of things, all these things sort of pop out. You create a piece of tech, and then you see what happens with it. You have a baseline goal to improve safety and de-risk the environment, but then all these human bits come into play, which is really interesting.
Yep.
I'll guarantee you that we've all at some point driven home, and when we got home, we said, "Well, I don't remember how I did that."
Yes. On that note, Colin, thank you. We're out of time. Is there somewhere that people can go to? Is this published somewhere, or is there somewhere that they can read about the trial and the application? Can we put a link somewhere with that information?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want me to put something on the chat now? Or send it to
or
you?
otherwise send it to Reggie and we'll include it in it. That'd be great if people want to read a little bit more.
It's all there on our website, and we have a white paper which has the full, and then there's a lot of supplementary videos. So a very good one that plays back the reconstruction of the independent trial with the fatigue driver. It's about 3 minutes, and it's really worth to say to anybody still on the call, have a look at that. It pretty much from start to finish explains exactly and visually where the 98% came from. And I think it's a scenario that anybody who's driving anything will recognise straight away what's happening. Yep.
Okay, excellent. We'll do that then. Thank you very much for coming in, speaking of fatigue, dialing in on your very morning shift from the UK. We really appreciate you spending time with us, and David, who's also probably jet lagged.
And thank you for not going to the pub before we finished.
No, this is very important, Colin. All the name of human factors research. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Fiona.
To you and to all of our speakers today, and everyone who engaged with the session in the Q&A. There's a few questions that we probably didn't get to in time that we will get responses for, and I saw some of the presenters jumping on and answering some of them as well as we went, which is great to see. This presentation will be online via the Arizo site if you missed anything or would like to share it with your teams. If you'd like more information on human factors, we've listed out some of our resources, which will be on the HF Managers Group site on the website, and then we'll pull together a list of some of the interesting resources that our presenters have mentioned today as well to put on there for you to do some follow-up reading. Thank you to Arizo for hosting us, including Alan for his opening remarks, and to Sharon Tang and Reggie Dutt for providing tech and comm support. And I'd also like to thank the broader Rail HF Managers Group for helping to curate, share and support today's program. You'll get a feedback email at some point on today's forum. Please fill that in. It really helps us determine if we do more of these and what we include, what sort of topics we cover. All feedback is good feedback for us. And please continue the conversation with like-minded colleagues over a bowl of chips and a beverage if you happen to be in one of the areas where there's going to be a networking event afterwards. On behalf of the Rail HF Managers Group and our friends at Arizo, thank you again for coming along, and enjoy your evening or your morning if you're in the UK.